Thank you, Man, and thank you to the Palestine Center for having us here again. Just want to recap quickly the points that Man talked about, and that is that Palestinians are, in fact, taking this process very seriously and making positive contributions both at the negotiating table and with regard to the roadmap obligations. On the other hand, it is Israeli actions, and by extension, this is also reflected at the negotiating table, are undermining both the current Palestinian leadership and the process, as well as prospects for a two-state solution. And lastly, of course, as everybody knows, time is running out. We're now 6 months into this process, and with another 6 months to go. And also, as Man pointed out, the current process really was launched at Annapolis was aimed at making progress in parallel, both to improve the situation on the ground and to make progress at the negotiating table. The two are inextricably linked, as Man has already illustrated. The fact that President Abbas has had to focus on issues related to the settlement freeze as opposed to the fate of refugees and the future of Jerusalem is clearly a distraction and more than unhelpful to the process. So let me just sort of outline some of the main requirements as we see them for a permanent status agreement by the end of this year. The first, as everybody knows, is statehood, and by statehood we mean a fully sovereign state based on the 1967 line, which of course should come as no surprise to anyone. And by that we mean, as Man also pointed out, the flexibility on the Palestinian part is to allow minor modifications to the 1967 line in order to accommodate some Israeli interests in the West Bank, but certainly not all, and certainly not in a way that would affect or adversely Palestinian contiguity, their viability, the prospect of having Jerusalem as a capital. But it's important to note that this is a key Palestinian concession, the idea of a one-to-one swap, and that is whatever territory in the West Bank is taken that would be annexed by Israel would be Palestinians would be given land that is equal in size and value from Israel, and we have, of course, criteria for that, which is highly technical. We don't need to get into, but this is obviously also related to the other main core issue, which is Jerusalem. Jerusalem, as defined by Palestinians, is the 6 square kilometers, the old municipality of Jerusalem as it existed in June of 1967. It is the 6 square kilometers around the old city, Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, that area, as opposed to the line that was arbitrarily and unilaterally expanded by Israel and, of course, illegally annexed. Refugees, the Palestinian formula, and one that is also reasonable, is to have a just and agreed upon resolution. This is the language, of course, of the Arab Peace Initiative. Water is another major core issue that is related both to end of conflict and the end of the occupation. And what Palestinians are pushing for is an equitable and reasonable allocation of shared water resources. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of these in some detail. This is just to give you an overall sense of what each of these issues are. And with regard to security, and my colleague Rami will talk about this in much more detail. Security, of course, is something that all nations aspire to, but it's important that whatever arrangements are agreed not impinge on Palestinian sovereignty. That is, of course, essential. And clearly all these issues, as you can tell, are interconnected and related. And this brings us to to the issues of the situation on the ground. As Man already pointed out, Israeli obligations under the roadmap are mainly with regard to settlements and internal closures and returning to the September 28th lines of 2001 and so forth, and Palestinian obligations are in the area of security and reform. And the important point here is the interconnectedness between the situation on the ground and the permanent status of all of these issues, because clearly whatever measures are taken on the ground are or not taken are with the aim of impacting the final status. So in terms of statehood and sovereignty, again, 1967 line, and that includes East Jerusalem as it is defined, as it existed in June of 1967, fully sovereign. Here you see the map of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and based on the 1967 line. Another key component is to have a territorial link between the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Palestinians envision a link that is under the sovereignty of Palestine, at a minimum, full control without Israeli interference in the operation of that link. And it's not just a link for, what we envision is not just a link for the movement of people and goods, but also infrastructure, water, transportation, and so forth, to ensure that that vital link between Gaza, because as everybody knows, Gaza and even the West Bank for that matter are not viable on their own. Gaza, of course, is a potential seaport and access to the world that way. The West Bank is access to Jordan and the rest of the Arab world. The two are essential. The two parts of Palestine are essential for a viable state, and so that link is critical. And of course, the notion of viable and contiguous, we have kind of set out objective criteria in these negotiations for what constitutes contiguity and viability based on a whole host of factors, which I won't bore you with, but it is something that can be measured objectively, even numerically. The obstacles, as we've seen, is ongoing settlement activity. Everybody knows, Man pointed out, has not ceased, and in fact, if anything, has intensified in direct violation of Israel's roadmap obligations. The internal closure regime, which has resulted in this sort of Swiss cheese map, as President Bush likes to refer to it, where Palestinians are isolated in enclaves, and I know you're all familiar with the situation on the ground and with this map. But also another important thing that we're seeing in the negotiations themselves is Israel's insistence on maintaining control over air, land, and sea borders. This was evident after the Gaza disengagement, where despite Israel's attempt to cast its withdrawal as an end to the occupation, clearly the occupation of Gaza continues because of the fact that Israel insisted and unilaterally controlling the air, land, and sea borders, and we see now the consequences of that, both from a humanitarian perspective on the ground, as you know, the siege on Gaza, as well as politically. We all know, of course, what took place last summer.